It's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. Hello, and welcome to Monster Mondays. I'm Jeff Arbuckle, co-host of the podcast Film Seizure, that you can catch each Wednesday at filmseizure.com or at a number of podcast providers online. This week, let's go overseas to the United Kingdom for some werewolf fantasy gothic horror action with a heavy dose of fairy tale. This comes in the form of 1984's The Company of Wolves, directed by Neil Jordan. Now, the original story of The Company of Wolves comes from a short story by writer Angela Carter as part of a larger collection of short stories that she published called The Bloody Chamber, which was published in 1979. Carter was a somewhat successful English novelist and journalist. Actually, she dabbled in a lot of different writings, but The Bloody Chamber was probably her biggest claim to fame. Now, Neil Jordan was just getting his feet wet in film when he was brought into this film's production. Carter previously adapted this as a radio play, but with Jordan, she turned this into a screenplay, sharing the writing credit with Jordan. Now, earlier in the 80s, Jordan had a behind-the-scenes gig on John Boorman's Excalibur, which later provided an in for Boorman to be the executive producer on Jordan's directorial debut in 1982 with Angel. Angel starred Stephen Ray, an actor he would work with several times in his career, including in this film. While I'm sure some saw sincere talent with Jordan on that previous film, The Company of Wolves really would be the one that really launched his career. After this movie, he'd direct Mona Lisa, which earned a Best Actor Academy Award nomination for Bob Hoskins. Following Mona Lisa, Jordan slipped a little bit with two not very well-received comedies, 1988's High Spirits and 1989's We're No Angels, and kind of a mild reception for 1991's The Miracle. But he came back in an extremely strong way in the 90s with 1992's The Crying Game, one of the most interesting and daring crime dramas ever made. Then, not to be outdone, his follow-up to that multi-nominated Oscar contender was an even bigger hit for him and a huge box office smash with Interview with the Vampire, starring Brad Pitt on his enormous swing towards stardom, and Tom Cruise, who was already one of the biggest stars at the time. So what we will find interesting about The Company of Wolves is the fact that this is a movie with an overarching plot that also has several smaller tales woven into it. So in a way, it kind of act as a anthology type of tale, but also mirrors some of that collection in which the source short story originated. Now, these aren't tales that were adapted from The Bloody Chamber, but there are stories in which this movie uses to kind of overlap the main plot. Now, real quick before we get into the primary plot, let's talk about our primary actors. First, we have Sarah Patterson playing Rosaline. Now, she was not really someone who necessarily set out to be an actress. This is one of those classic friend goes to provide support to someone auditioning, but ends up getting discovered herself sort of situations. It was Jordan himself that spotted her and gave her the role of Rosaline. Now, she's fantastic in this movie. I mean, she was probably 13 or 14 when this was filmed. And she is mature beyond her age in terms of how she holds her own with all of the adults around her. She's really great in this. She also had the lead a couple of years later as Snow White in a direct-to-video film. But it wasn't long before she retired, only to return for a couple of roles in movies made by a friend of hers in the 2000s. The real standouts, as far as the names in this, are playing her father and also the person playing her granny. Now, her father is played by David Warner, who had memorable roles in 2 Star Trek films and as the chief baddie in Tron. Granny, on the other hand, is the most recognizable person in the whole cast, Angela Lansbury. Lansbury was best known to my generation as Jessica Fletcher, novelist and case solver on the TV series Murder, She Wrote. and then as the voice of the little tea kettle in Beauty and the Beast. In fact, she sings the title song in that movie. So anytime you hear that Oscar-winning song, which is just called Beauty and the Beast, it's Lansbury usually singing it. She had been in other popular movies throughout her career, like the original The Manchurian Candidate, Bedknobs and Broomsticks, as well as Oscar-winning films like National Velvet and Gaslight. She was also a 3-time Oscar nominee for herself for the aforementioned Manchurian Candidate and Gaslight, as well as The Picture of Dorian Gray. In 2013, she was given an honorary Oscar for her career, but Lansbury sadly died just a few days shy of her 97th birthday in October of 2022. But as this movie opens, we have an introduction of Rosaline, who lives in a country home with her parents and her older sister, Alice. Now, Alice is not exactly the nicest of siblings, fulfilling a bit of that role that we see in a lot of fairy tales of a good girl often belittled and picked on by a jealous sister or stepsister or just flat out mean sister. Alice is definitely kind of playing that mean sister role. Alice seems to spend most of her time sleeping, daydreaming, and dreaming, often of living in an 18th century forest. And in this forest, the whole village there is haunted by nightmarish creatures based on her toys and twisted trees full of spider webs and such. But in this night's dream, it's Alice who is chased and ultimately killed by a pack of wolves. Rosaline's kindly grandmother offers to help take care of her as her parents mourn. And the movie remains in the 18th century setting. Now, every now and then, it does transition back to the real present-day Rosaline, kind of in her bed, kind of sleeping or reacting to things that are going on in the dream. But for the most part, it stays in that 18th century setting. Now, Granny consistently drills into Rosaline's head that if she strays from the path through the woods, she will become lost forever. As a child, she would naturally have no ability to protect herself as she is too young to understand these facts of life. These facts include things like never stray from the path, never eat apples off the ground because they're going to have worms in them, and never trust a man whose eyebrows meet. Yeah, those unibrows. Yeah, but, all of that sounds like sage advice to me. But that night, Granny tells Rosaline that a wolf is not always what he seems. Not every wolf is hairy on the outside, who, with those being the ones that kill someone like Alice and send her to heaven because they're just simply natural creatures that they kill to eat, and the victims of their the victims of their murders basically are not really cursed. However, there are those who wear their coat of hair on the inside, and when they bite, they will drag their victim straight to hell with them. She then tells Rosaline a story about a woman who married a man who is one of these hairy wolves on the inside. And what's more, his eyebrows meet too. So, yeah, I guess this guy is only a worm-infested apple away from being really bad news. But in truth, this is a tale of a man who is actually a lycanthrope. He ran off when he transformed on his wedding night while his wife waited for him in bed, and never returned, at least for years after she had married another man and had children with that other man. And upon his return, he says that he's starving and demands food from her, and he berates her for remarrying and having children. And he ends up tearing his flesh off to reveal his wolf features. Luckily, the woman's husband returns to decapitate the werewolf to save her and their kids. But when the head lands across the room, it reverts back to that guy's human look, which gets the woman smacked for remarking that he looks just as he did when she married him years ago. Rosaline doesn't react very well to that story. She says that she'll never let a man strike her, which is really kind of interesting because there is something in there about the role of women. This movie is all about transitioning from a vulnerable girl into an adult woman and what her role is expected to be in a lot of social situations. And yet Rosaline kind of consistently resists that, or at least pushes back against it. But Rosaline returns home to her parents the next day, and on the way, her granny tells her that she won't be a girl much longer as she is growing up. And sure enough, one of the boys in the village has eyes for her, and she might be somewhat interested in him too, proving that indeed she is growing up. Oh, and that's why Granny wanted to tell her about men with eyebrows that meet, because that's going to be something she desperately needs to avoid. They tend to be rather smooth talkers, rather charming, but if they have eyebrows that meet, they are likely wolves on the inside. But the morning after hearing and seeing her parents make love, Rosaline asks if her father hurts her mother because his grunting sounds like the beast in Granny's stories. And her mother explains that if there truly is a beast within men, they will meet their match with whatever beast is inside women, too. It's a great line. But Granny tells Rosaline another story about bastard children of priests. Really kind of a fascinating thing when you think about priests aren't supposed to be sleeping around with women. But this tale is all about those who are bastard children of priests, and those who are born feet first, whose eyebrows meet in the middle, are destined to meet the devil himself if he ventures off the trail in the woods. And sure enough, the focus of this story does just that. The devil, played by an uncredited Terrence Stamp, is chauffeured in a Rolls Royce. For some reason, they do the anachronistic Rolls Royce thing, but it's kind of neat. It's driven by a blonde woman who I think is just actually Rosaline in a wig, but I'm not sure for certain. But anyway, he gives the boy a potion that allows for him to transform. He rubs a little bit of the potion on his chest, and it grows hair on his chest instantly, almost like the devil is enticing people to mature faster than they should. But this does also have something kind of like a monkey's paw effect that damns the kid as well. But the moral of the story, according to Granny, is to avoid naked boys in the wood. That sounds pretty sound too. But speaking of boys in the wood, that local boy who likes Rosaline wants to take her for a walk with him into the woods along the path after church, to which she agrees. It's discovered soon after that the local cattle have been getting attacked and killed by what seems to be wolves. And as Rosaline tells her mother about a woman who was terribly treated by a nobleman, so she set about getting revenge on him at his wedding by arriving pregnant with the nobleman's child. And it turns out she's also a witch and uses her power to turn the nobles into wolves. And once her baby was born, the witch commands the wolves to serenade them every night, to which her mother says, well, what kind of a joy would that be, hearing wolves cry all night? Rosaline says it's to take delight in the power that this woman had. Again, kind of bucking against what her role in human society is. But meanwhile, the men of the village have found the wolf who attacked the cattle and killed it. And when Rosaline's father returns home with this trophy, the forepaw of the biggest wolf he says he has ever seen, he shows his wife and daughter that before his very eyes, it turned into a human hand. Now later, Rosaline is sent to deliver a basket of goodies to her granny. As she traverses the path in the wood, she is startled by the sudden appearance of a huntsman. He's charming enough, and he seeks to romance the girl, but it's not exactly picked up by Rosaline at first that he is this charming man whose eyebrows meet. And he wants a kiss from this girl, but she resists. He gives her his tri-corner hat and says that she may wear it until they meet again, because he plans on getting to Granny's house before her. It's a little bit of a competition that they have with kisses on the line and all of that stuff as far as payment. He's really coming on strong to this girl. But anyway, he heads off up the path and does indeed arrive at Granny's house ahead of Rosaline. And it turns out that he is indeed a wolf, and he confronts Granny and eventually transforms to kill Granny by karate chopping her head off which causes it to fly across the room and shatter into porcelain pieces. When Rosaline arrives, it does not take long for her to realize that the huntsman has killed her granny. As he continues to attempt to seduce the girl, she shoots him with his own rifle in a brief struggle. He explains that he is both man and wolf and travels between the two worlds. He eventually has no choice but to ultimately transform all the way into his wolf form. Realizing that she's hurt this wolf and feels kind of sorry for him, Rosaline comforts him by telling him a story of a she-wolf who meant no harm to anyone in a village, but she wandered into this village only to be shot by one of the villagers and forced to run away. She takes comfort at the church where this wolf woman changes back into a mute human and is taken care of and healed by the priest. But after healing, she eventually decides that her true place is to return to the world of the wolves, so she does so. Soon, the rest of the village arrives at Granny's to seek Rosaline for fear of there being another wolf that needs to be hunted. Rosaline is found, but she has now transformed herself into a wolf. Her mother stops her father from shooting her, and Rosaline runs off into the forest with the other wolves, apparently deeming that she would have more autonomy, more control, more power as part of the pack as she would be a woman in human society. But the real Rosaline awakens from her dream to see a wolf breaking into her room through her window, and the movie ends with a warning to girls to beware the wolves that lurk within men. Now let's talk about those three things I liked about The Company of Wolves. First, the look of this fairy tale world of this wooded area that Rosaline dreams of is exactly that. Dreamlike and wonderfully gothic, and really kind of comes off as a little bit expressionist too. This was created by Anton Furst, who was a famed production designer. He's probably best known for creating the look of Gotham City for Tim Burton's 1989 Batman film. The work on Batman actually won him an Oscar, but sadly he died a year and a half later when he committed suicide. But this is a fairly complicated set. It's an entire village within a wood, so there's twisting and turning paths that all look like they are well built into the set. There are little clearings with cluttered structures and like little kind of common areas for this village. It's both whimsical and frightening at the same time. Whimsical in the sense that this meets that kind of fairy tale look and feel, but there are lots of shadows and nooks and crannies that make this kind of also a little spooky and scary. So it's really an excellently designed film. Next, the effects of this movie are really great. The scene in which Stephen Ray tore his flesh off and revealed to be a werewolf is gruesome, but really effective. It even looks painful, but not in a, ooh, I'm flinching from seeing a guy tear his skin off, but actually for the actor, it looked real enough to come across as if Stephen Ray himself is ripping his skin off. Then later, when the nobles are transformed into wolves, that's a wonderful transformation scene too. It really does look like they are succumbing to a spell as they slowly transform into literal wolves before running off into the woods. I also liked, they do have a pretty good close-up of like when the kid gets the potion from the devil, from Terrence Stamp. He rubs it on his chest and you see a close-up of the hair sprouting. That's a really good effect as well. I'm sure it was just hair pulled into that chest piece. So it probably was shot backwards, but still looked really, really good. It really did look like he was growing hair on his chest. There's a moment in the confrontation between Granny and the huntsman wolf when she hits him in the face, and then he has the super long dog-like tongue clean or, kind of lick his wound. It's a neat effect that works really well in the film's limited budget. And then in the big climax, the huntsman's transformation is part effect, part actor Micah Burgess doing some really good physical work, and part dog-shaped effect kind of bursting out of his human skin. The snout of the wolf kind of emerging out of the human mouth is seen in a lot of the covers to the home video releases, promotional pictures used for the movie's ads, and so forth. It's a quick shot, but it's quite memorable and really kind of plays up that whole idea that werewolves are kind of just wearing human skin as opposed to actually being transformed completely out of the skin of the people. So a little bit more of that skinwalker idea. Now, third, this is a gentle reminder that that I get while watching this movie, that this was something common in another time in film history. And you may be wondering who exactly this movie was made for as you watch it. Was it made for children? Well, it's a little dark for children, or at least some parents would certainly think it is. Is it made for adults? Well, it's not seemingly mature enough to be that either. It's a gothic horror movie, yes, but it's also fantasy. But here's the thing. This is a true fairy tale through and through. It's simply a retelling and reimagining of Little Red Riding Hood. Early on, Granny is knitting Rosaline a cloak. And yes, it's red. There's no, there's no hiding the fact that Rosaline is Little Red Riding Hood in this. She wears the cloak often throughout the movie once it's completed, and there's a lot of talk of wolves, and there's a huntsman. She even says the lines about how big his eyes are, how big his teeth are, how big his arms are, although it's kind of used in a way where she's almost succumbing to to her desires as she's kind of now transitioning into womanhood. It's really interesting how they utilize those lines from the fairy tale to note her transition from somebody young to somebody who can kind of think on her own and be attracted to things on her own. 40 years ago, this would have been something that looked and seemed very mature in terms of werewolf transformation scenes. A little bit of gore, a little bit of violence, a hint of sexuality, like I said. However, I feel like this, would have been quite fine and proper for maybe kids over the age of, say, 10 or 12 to watch. It's dark, but no darker than some of the other movies like The Dark Crystal or Legend or even Labyrinth that would have been marketed to younger audiences at the same time that this movie was coming out. It's no darker or more adult than any of the Grimm's Brothers stuff or other fairy tales that have been since kind of fairly sanitized thanks to Disney animated films. So my third like goes to this movie's kind of unclear intended audience because it represents a time in history of movies that a movie led by a teenage girl could use fairy tales as inspiration to be a little darker, a little bit more gothic, and still succeed in being a worthy watch for pretty much anyone, at least over the age of 12. There should be more movies like this that takes a chance on being old-fashioned in order to kind of sell itself as a true dark and gothic horror fairy tale that kids can also kind of engage with as well. But that wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. You can catch new episodes of Monster Mondays each Monday at filmseizure.com. Don't forget to follow Film Seizure at Facebook, Threads, Instagram, and Blue Sky. You can also subscribe to Film Seizure to get both the Film Seizure podcast and Monster Mondays at your favorite podcast providers, as well as YouTube. You can also check out my website, bmovieenema.com, to read new reviews every Friday morning. Next time, we hear a warning from above as I go out and do awful things all because God told me to. Until next week, stay spooky.